Well, this morning we are going to take up the subject of Edgar J. Driscoll,
Yeah.
my grandfather, Bill. And I'd like you to tell us a little bit about what you know of his origins.
Okay. Born in Boston, 1890. We know who his parents were, we already discussed that. He was an infant at number 4 Unity Street, and in the earlier part of this filming, you showed a picture of number 4 Unity Street, which is in the shadow of the old North Church. And as we pointed out earlier, that was a tenement at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And this is supposition, shortly after Daddy was born, there would have been now my grandparents and 4 children, John, May, and Will preceding Daddy. So they were in this tenement with 4 children, and they moved out of there and they moved to Charlestown. Charlestown, I have no knowledge of really where they lived or anything about it. Daddy referred to childhood in Charlestown, knew it well, all that kind of stuff, but couldn't accurately say he lived this place or that place in Charlestown.
Mm-hmm.
What we do know is he went to Mechanic Arts High School and graduated, and Sean, we don't know exactly the year, but when he was in high school, we know he worked part-time, and this is a story that he referred to. He worked after school, weekends, and so forth, in a butcher shop in Faneuil Hall, the Faneuil Hall thing there in Boston. And that's where he learned his skills at carving, and to the day he died, he was proud of sitting at the head of the table and having to feed 16 or 18 people, and he could carve so delicately that it still has some left over. They were thin slices, but if you put a lot of mashed potatoes underneath them, it looks good.
And he carved sitting down, didn't he? Never
Oh,
stood
he's
up.
very proud of that. Good point.
Yeah.
He was very proud of the fact that he carved sitting down. You know, hackers would stand up and lean over the beast, in his opinion. The only other story about his apprenticeship, if you will, in the butcher business or meat business or whatever, was, and it shows his sense of humor, because he told me this story, but after work was over one day, presumably a weekend, the guys that were working there decided to go out for a refreshment, as he called it. I'm sure they went out for a couple of beers there in the area of Faneuil Hall. And one of the kids that they worked with, or one of the guys that they worked with, had a speech impediment. And so when they said they were going to do this and so forth, this kid said, well, I have to call home and tell my mother I'm going to be late. And in those days, telephones weren't that common. So they're sitting around while this kid calls home, and his daddy told it, he rang, asked for 203 or whatever the number was, and then there was a pause, and then he said, "Hi, Mom, get who this is." Daddy told that with great relish. We know that in 1907, he entered the investment business, the financial world, and he went to work for a guy named A.B. Conant. It was the A.B. Conant Company. And there was a bit of a distinction there, because at the same time Joe Kennedy was referred to his father-in-law, the mayor of Boston, Honey Fitz. Now the tie-in comes again, because there were 2 young and up-and-coming Irish Catholics that were starting to break the barrier in the financial world in Boston, which was, what it was. And it was Daddy and Joseph Kennedy. And I don't know if Joe Kennedy worked for a while at A.B. Conant. I suspect he did, but I'm not sure of that. But at any rate, he entered into that part of the business world and was obviously very successful very soon, because he was soon a vice president of A.B. Conant, and he went all over New England selling bonds and so forth, and you know, that was the way it was then. And he continued that, met and fought for the attention of Catherine Rooney, my mother, won out over Jack Morton, who remained a friend of the family's, but we were watching films last night, and there Jack Morton keeps appearing, and he appeared in Mother and Daddy's life for many years afterwards, and I remember him when I was growing up. But at any rate, he won the affections of Mother, and they were married in July of 1917. And fairly soon after that, he entered the service, because war had broken out, and he went into what was called the 99th Aero Squadron.
I think we have a picture of that.
Yeah, and the 99th Aero Squadron was what is now the United States Air Force, but in those days it was the air service of the U.S. Army. And Daddy went down for training at Kelly Field in San Antonio, Texas, and Mother accompanied him down there. And there he got his training, and I have pictures, maybe Sean, we could put one up or two, of Mother and Daddy at the country club that was attached to Kelly Field, and you know, she lived an officer's wife's life down there. Peripheral story to that is that I had a motorcycle, a 1929 Indian Scout, when I turned 16 or 17, that I owned jointly with Lars Soderbergh, and of course didn't tell Daddy and Mother that I had this machine, but I finally drove it home one night, and when Daddy came home, he saw the motorcycle outside and asked, "What's that you're doing out there?" And I sort of told him what had happened. I'm not sure he disclosed the full truth that I owned half of it, but I probably said it was Lars Soderbergh. And he sort of mumbled about only damn fools ride them and how dangerous they are and everything else. But strange enough, he didn't say, forbid me to ride it. Years later, when we were cleaning out the attic at 99 Grayfield Avenue, I came across all these pictures that you have in the album there and some stuff from Kelly Field. And there is Daddy astride a big Harley Davidson. So I took it down and I said to Mother, "Did Daddy ever have a motorcycle?" "Oh," she said, "he drove me crazy driving that thing when we were in Texas." He was sort of do as I say, not as I did kind of guy. But
All right.
Let's go on a little bit about the 99th. What you know about that, Bill?
okay, the 99th was shipped out of Kelly Field when they were ready, and I have the whole history of the 99th. It gives when they departed down there, and how they went by train, and how they embarked from Newark, New Jersey, Hoboken, New Jersey, and they were on the White Star liner, the RMS Cedric, on the 14th of November of that year. And then they landed in Liverpool, England, and from Liverpool they went south to Winchester, across to Le Havre, 2 days there, and then joined the Expeditionary Forces, 2nd Aviation, and so forth. Now, the role of the Aero Squadron was to get up there and look and see what's going on.
And photograph.
And photograph it.
Right.
But they were the eyes of the infantry and the artillery down on the ground.
Mm.
And an interesting sidelight to that, Daddy was adjutant. He didn't fly. He didn't have his wings. He was not a pilot. but he was the adjutant, which is equivalent to the administrator of a squadron. And he had the rank of lieutenant. And their mission, as they say, was to be the eyes of the ground forces. And I don't have it here, but there's a wonderful memo as the adjutant that Daddy sent to the flyboys in the 99th, in effect saying there has been a recent, not rash, but there have been several of you who have asked for transfers to fighting squadrons. And in effect he says, forget about it. Forget about getting your silk scarf and becoming another Eddie Rickenbacker and the joy of all the young women in every bar that you can go to. You're here for a mission that is a very important one for winning the war, and none of you are going to get a transfer, period. So that was Daddy's way of handling these guys that wanted more glamour out of the war. And in that book that you have your hand on is some wonderful shots of what they did over there, and maybe, Sean, we can get some of those in. But it shows the trench warfare, and you see in some of those photographs, it's remarkable, you see the actual trenches that were dug in of our forces, and not very far away, the German trenches. And you could see the no man's land and all that with the quadrants and everything else to help out the artillery and softening them up before they went over the top, so to speak, which over the top means going up from the trench and over at the enemy. That's where the expression over the top comes from.
And these, it's very interesting because the trenches have names to them. One is Wolf Trench, one is Pola Trench. These will be very interesting. We can put these in the video. But that's what they were doing, was taking pictures of the battlefields and the trenches, and we have pretty good documentation of that, so we'll be able to show that. Any other thoughts on that, Bill?
No, except I'm so delighted that that we have this book, because it's a real treasure. It's the kind of thing that gets lost, abandoned, thrown away, whatever, over the years.
That's interesting.
So it's a treasure to have.
Now, when did he come back from the war, Bill?
Well, he came back in, I've got it here, but I think it was February or March of 1919. Your father being born, what was his...
January.
January for
19.
January, whatever, 19.
Yeah.
19th of January, Jack, your father, was born, and Mother had gone to live after she came back from Kelly Field and Daddy overseas with Dar and Ganna at what we now call the Holy Name site of the Driscoll, of the Roonies. Mm-hmm. And your father was born there while Daddy was still in France. Mm-hmm. So he came home to a 3-4 month old.
Now, he came home in April, you think?
It might have been April.
Perhaps
I'm not
April.
sure, but right in there, yeah.
And did he go to work right away?
Yeah, he would have
Did he
gone
go back
right
to-
back to A.B. Conant.
Okay.
Yes, he did. And that is a remarkable kind of thing here, and I don't know if we're going to be able to show it, but certainly in the addendum, Sean, we can show that by September of the year he came back, which would be 1919, he had contacted an architect, and he had the architect design the house that he and Mother built on Church Street, fairly close to the Rooney estate, in 1919. And I have the plans here, and that house is still in existence, but that's where they started when he came back from the war, went back to A.B. Conant. Mm-hmm. What's remarkable to me is that, you know, in the short time that he's had from 1907 to 1919 with time out to go to war, he had accumulated enough loot working for A.B. Conant and selling bonds and so forth to afford an architect and a beautifully designed house that he moved his new bride and your father into.
And we'll show those plans.
Yep.
We can put, we
Yeah.
can put those in the video.
So that's that, and then he and mother begat the children that they have, which we know is number 7, and they decided that that house on Church Street, as we called it, was, they were in need of more space because I was coming along. So somewhere in 1928, they bought 99 Grayfield Avenue. And I was born there in 1929, February of 1929. And they obviously sold the Church Street house. And that's where they lived until, okay, so 2 great things happened in 1929. Actually, 3. I was born. And there was the great massacre, it's called the Valentine's Day Massacre in Chicago, and Al Capone. And then in October, which is the significant one, was the stock market crash.
Yep.
So here Daddy has this big house, this growing family, now he's got 6 kids, he's still working for A.B. Conant, but the Depression is starting, it starts. So by 1936, A.B. Conant has either folded or something, but there's no more A.B. Conant for him, he starts his own firm.
And what was that called, Bill? Is that the National Appraisal?
No, that was a secondary business. I think it was just E.J. Driscoll and Company.
Right.
And that's where he got his own list of clients and continued on in the financial business that he was in all his life.
Yep.
And the National Appraisal Company was something he picked up as a result of the Depression and the death of Frank Rourke. Frank and Mary Rourke were great friends of Daddy and Mother, and Frank died of a heart attack or something unexpectedly, and was left with this small firm called the National Appraisal Company. And to help Mary out, he sort of took over for her, and I understood later, not from Daddy, he never would talk about it, but Mother did, that he kept on some of the employees and kept that going. As a matter of fact, your father worked for the National Appraisal Company one summer, and Daddy sort of kept that going, and so that was the National Appraisal Company, and he stayed at that off and on for a number of years, and then took on a lot of civic kind of things. One of them was he was appointed to the Pardon and Paroles Board Investigatory Committee, which a big thing was going on at that time in Massachusetts, a scandal over the selling of pardons and paroles to incarcerated prisoners. And Daddy was appointed to that by the then governor, who was Leverett Saltonstall. And Daddy and Mother became friends of the Saltonstalls as a result of that. Over the years, he went on to become a senator from Massachusetts and a distinguished Republican. And some of the other things, and I'm looking now at his obituary, but he served as a director of the Boston Municipal Research Bureau, and he was a member of the American Irish Historical Society, the Knights of Columbus, the Clover Club, the Downtown Club, where he ate every day of his business career, by himself, strangely enough. I remember that. He never seemed to have lunch with anybody. He didn't believe in dining and conducting business, but he took his break and went to the top of the Parker House, where that club was, had his own table and ate there almost every day he was downtown, which is kind of interesting. And he was a loner in that respect.
Yeah.
But a joiner of sorts.
Mm-hmm.
He never joined, I asked him once why he didn't join the American Legion of Veterans of Foreign Wars.
Yeah.
And he said, I don't need to sneak out of the house to have a cocktail. That was his opinion of these veterans groups.
What about the milk port? Was he on the milk
No,
port?
that was Mother.
Oh, that was okay.
Yeah.
So we'll get to that in another one.
We got plenty of time to cover that. So that was sort of the business and civic background of that.
Tell me, when he was threatened, as we all were, and you all were, by the Depression, what was was Deering a response to that?
In a way, yes. Interesting question. The genesis of Deering, I have always been led to believe, and I believe it's true to this day, was because, bear in mind, we've talked about Howardsport and Cape Cod, and by 1935, Mother and Daddy had determined that the Cape was getting too crowded. Now bear in mind, Mother, and I don't think we've told this before, but Mother, one of her fond memories of her youth, and she was 10, 11, 12 years old, something like that, she was allowed to go with the driver that took the team of horses down for Don Ganaruni to use during the summer at their summer house in Howardsport. She was allowed to go down with the driver and some of the luggage that went down for the summer. And the first night they stopped in Quincy, and the second night Bridgewater, and the third day they arrived in Howardsport.
3 days to do it.
And nowadays you can go from Jaffrey to the Cape Cod Canal in less than 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
But in 1935 they thought the Cape was getting too crowded. So they looked for a place that would substitute or be our summer home, and decided a place in the country was what they wanted. And that's how Deering came about.
So Deering wasn't a direct response to the threat of the Depression.
No, but it was, well, in a way, it was taking advantage of the fact there was a depression on it. Because they discovered that through a real estate agent, and that house in Deering had been built in 1804 by a family named Goodale. And the Goodales had come up to Deering in the late 70s, and I'm talking about now 1790, somewhere in there. They were among the founders of the town of Deering. And by 1804, they had gotten their act together enough to build the house that we bought. And so Daddy took advantage of prices in the, he obviously had some stashed away. We weren't on the breadline. And he bought that house, they bought that house, in 1936. And it was 200 acres of land on the hilltop with a gorgeous view that you could see Mount Washington 90 miles away on a clear day. A sweeping view, 200 acres of land, and the wonderful old farmhouse built in 1804, traditional colonial, 2 big barns and all kinds of outbuildings.
Where was the second part?
Second barn blew down in the 1938 hurricane.
Okay.
Yeah.
And where was it?
Well, you have the lawn, which was really the road. You have
Right.
the lawn, and you have the barn that you remembered.
Right.
And right next to it, going towards the view and the mountain and all that, was the second. That was an ox barn, and could take 14 head or 14 yoke. I guess it was 14 head. It should be 7 yoke of oxen. That was called the ox barn. And all kinds of outbuildings. the house was fully found. You walked in the door and there was all the furniture, the bedding, everything. And that cost $3,600.
Holy God, $3,600,
$3,600. And it was not, the Goodale family had lived there from the late 1700s until 1925 or 26, and a family named Eckes bought it, and they never did anything to it. They lived in it, but not year-round, and they were basically from Florida. And the reason they bought it was because the last of the Goodales that was on the homestead was Katie Goodale, and she went and lived in Hillsborough, and I remember as a child seeing Katie Goodale, so she lasted through the 30s anyway.